Hi everybody, welcome to Scone Day. Making two kinds of scones today. One, a sweet and delicious blueberry scone, blueberry orange scone, and another savory bacon, cheddar, and green onion scone. If these sound good to you, stay tuned and see how to make them. And the best news is you could switch either of these up to add flavors or use flavors that are ones that you really like, not just the ones that I really like. And I'll tell you how to do it. Okay, let's get going with the ingredients we are going to need to make our first scones of the day, which are a savory scone. First, we're going to need 2 cups of flour, and in all my videos, I'm always telling everybody how, to make sure you measure your flour when it's fluffy. And it dawned on me that, people might not exactly know what I mean. So I've measured out 1 cup already, but I'm going to show you how I do the other one. Now, of course, you can use things like a flour sifter or a whisk or other things like that that are designed to kind of fluff up your flour. But I'll be honest, I'm kind of lazy. I don't want to use a lot of extra equipment if I don't need to, because then I have to wash it. So this is how I do it. I've got my bag of flour in here and just a spoon. And what I do is, whatever is on this top layer, I'm just fluffing it up and stirring it around and making it look light and airy. Then I'm going to pull out a large spoonful. And I don't want to drop it from here or drop it from high up, because then as it lands in the cup, it compacts, and I don't want it to compact. So I'm just going to gently place it in there. Give another little stir, gently place it in there. Give another little stir. You get the idea. Gently place it in. And you might need to move it around a little bit, but just ever so gently move it to cover your space. But you're not packing it down. You're just spreading it out so it will cover the entire measuring cup. And once you get to this point where obviously there's too much flour, but you've got good coverage of the whole inside of the cup, then I just take something flat, and luckily my spoon handle here is flat, and I swipe the excess back into the bag, and there we go. We have our cup of flour. Okay, so easy peasy. So that's the first thing. So 2 cups of fluffy flour. Then we have 1 tablespoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon each of salt and sugar. Then we're going to use half a stick, which is 4 tablespoons of cold butter that you have cut up into these tiny bits. They could even be smaller than this, but this is about okay. What I usually do, because it's impossible to cut these up and separate those bits without handling them, so I will cut this up, and then while I'm prepping everything else, put these back in the fridge so they have a chance to firm up again a little bit. We've got 3/4 of a cup of finely shredded cheddar cheese. If you don't have cheddar, or if you don't have finely shredded, it's okay. You could substitute a different kind of cheese. If you have a block, you could just grate some yourself. If you don't have a grater, it's okay. This recipe will still work for you. You could just use a knife, cut really thin slices, and then just chop that into teeny tiny bits. Or you just have slightly bigger chunks, and that's okay too, because then you'll just have bigger pieces of cheese as chunks throughout these scones instead of just a little bit kind of more spread out. But either way, it's going to work out okay for you. Then I have half a cup of chopped herbs. I'm using green onions today because my awesome mom had these growing in her garden and gave me some. So I'm using them up while I have them. Anything that's kind of in this onion family that has greens that you could use works well for this. So this works. Chives work really nicely. Even garlic greens would work really nicely. If you are lucky enough to live somewhere where you could go out and harvest your own ramps, those are amazing. That would work great in here. But I'm using green onions today, or just the green part, and chop those up, and about half a cup of them is what we're going to use. And these are relatively easy to get to, these and chives, so you shouldn't have too much of a problem with it. We're going to be using 4 strips of bacon in this recipe. If you want to do a non-meat recipe, that's fine too. You can just skip it. And then we have half a cup of sour cream. And then we're going to need just a little bit of milk, or half and half, to add right at the end, just in case the dough is not quite soft enough. Okay, those are all the ingredients we are going to need, and I'm going to show you next how I like to prep my bacon for this. This is how I cook my bacon for any recipe where I just need to add bacon to it and I'm not just eating it like for breakfast or something. What's nice about this method is it doesn't leave me with a lot of mess and cleanup after, and it also preserves some of the bacon fat that runs off of it, so that I can incorporate that into a recipe too if I want to. So what I've done is I've just taken a regular glass jar. I have cut all my bacon slices in half so they will fit, and I have placed them evenly around the top of this jar. You don't really want them to overlap too much because you want this to be cooked relatively evenly. Okay, after you have done that, I have a piece of paper towel. This is 2 full-size sheets. If you have those that are like the smaller sheets, just rip off a piece that is, roughly this length. And what I do is I roll this, I hold right on one side in the center, and I kind of just roll it into a large cone shape like this. I place it over my bacon jar and bowl, and then I twist up the top. If you haven't guessed, this is going to go in the microwave. So the reason I do this, it has nothing to do with how the bacon will cook, but it has everything to do with how much splatter there will be and how much cleanup there is going to be in the microwave. So I'm going to take this and pop it in the microwave. I've got 4 slices of bacon, so I'm going to start with 3 minutes. I can't tell you an exact time because unfortunately all microwaves are a little bit different. The bacon, it's going to depend on how thick of a slice you have. So what you're going to want to do is start with 2-3 minutes and then keep going every 30 seconds or so until you feel that most of the fat has drained off of that bacon and it's looking pretty consistently crisp all the way around. I mean, if you stop it and you take it out because you think it's good, and as you are taking it off the jar, and be careful when you do that because it's going to be hot, as you're taking it off, if you think, oh, it's still a little limp, it may still be a little chewy, it's okay, just put it back in for another minute or however long it takes. When I come back, I will let you know exactly how long it took this time, but it doesn't mean that that's how long it's going to take for you. So just be conscious of that and keep checking it so that your bacon is done just right. While that's cooking, you're going to want to get some other things ready. You're going to want to get a bowl and a mixing spoon, and you're going to want a baking sheet and one of these silicone baking pads. If you don't have those, you can use parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, you're just going to want to make sure that you grease your baking sheet well so nothing will stick. Okay, I've also turned my oven on to 375, so it'll be all ready to go as soon as we're done putting these scones together. I just pulled this out of the microwave. And you will see, I don't know if you could see it, but this cover does have a lot of grease splatters on it, so I'm really happy that I used it. And this is what happened to that bacon. It's really shrunk up quite a bit. It is pretty crisp, though quite hot right now. And you will see I've got some bacon grease in the jar, smoking hot, and also in the bowl. Don't get rid of that. You could use that for cooking other things, to fry something in bacon fat. But we're actually going to add a little bit of it to our scone batter just to give it that extra little boost of bacon flavor. If you're not using this, it's cool. Just add an extra tablespoon of milk to your batter and you should come up with roughly the same result. I'm just going to let this cool off for a little bit so that I can chop up this bacon into teeny tiny bits and also measure how much of this I have and wait till it's cool enough to actually touch this and work with it, and then just take 1 tablespoon of this bacon grease, if I have that much, and put that aside for adding into our dough. So I've chopped up my bacon, and I did get a tablespoon of bacon fat that was at the bottom of that jar, so that's all great. That's just going to go over here, and let's get started on the rest of the dough. So I'm going to grab my bowl, and into this bowl I'm going to put my dry ingredients. So that is the flour and the baking powder, which I started off having in separate bowls, but I combined them so I could use that other bowl for the bacon fat that I had drained off. Oh, speaking of bacon, I wanted to let you know, in my microwave, I put it in initially for 3 minutes. It wasn't quite done yet. I put it in for another 25 seconds, and not quite there, so just another 20 seconds more, and it was right where I wanted it to be. So you're gonna have to judge with your microwave. If you haven't cooked bacon in the microwave before, it might take you a while. It's better to do 30 seconds half a dozen times than to go too long and end up burning it and having to start over. Okay, so we've got our baking soda and flour in there. We're going to add our salt and sugar. And just mix it around so it's, well spread out. You don't want to have chunks of your dough that have a lot of salt and other sections that don't. So this is the easiest time to make sure that that is well incorporated and spread out throughout the entire batter. Because once you start adding wet things to this, it forms more chunks and it's harder to get things to just spread around. Okay, so now we're going to add our cold butter, and I hope you are doing this project with very clean hands, because what we want to do is just coat all that butter with flour. So just toss it around until all those cubes are individual and coated, and then you're going to just start like squishing it. Right? So then you expose more of that butter and put that right back in the flour. Squish. I mean, you don't have to pull them out to do that. I'm just doing it to show you. But the idea is to get that flour squished out or even broken up then into smaller pieces and get that all coated with flour. And you are just going to keep doing this until your flour and butter mixture kind of resembles coarse crumbs. Some people like to do this with a pastry blender or a pastry cutter. It's one of these, it's a tool that's got several wires on it because it does break, slice through that butter, and then the flour gets caught on the sides, on the exposed sides. But I honestly like to do it this way because you can feel where you've got those bigger chunks still. And you can go immediately to them. Whereas when you're using that, you're just using your best guess, and you might still have some big chunks in there. You'll probably end up having to feel around in there anyway if you don't want to have those large chunks. I mean, you don't have to worry about them getting too small. You just want there to be pieces of butter, but really small ones, and all incorporated throughout this dough. If you made the Mother's Day tart with me, that veggie tart, and we made that rough puff pastry, this is kind of the same concept, which is why you're starting with cold butter, and hopefully your hands are not too hot today. If you tend to have super hot hands, go ahead and run them under some cold water before you start doing this, but make sure that they're very dry before you put your hands in here, because you don't want to start turning this into paste by adding in any water. And as soon as you get to that point where you feel like, oh, I'm not really feeling any big chunks anymore, this is kind of just running through my hands, and it doesn't really look just like flour anymore. It looks a little more chunky, like crumbs. It looks more like a breadcrumb kind of vibe. Then you know you're done with this. I'm a child. Anyhow, okay, so we've got this. Great. Next, we are going to add everything else. We're going to put in our cheese. We are going to put in our onions or chives. We're going to put in our bacon. We're going to give all that stuff a stir. I know, I haven't put the bacon fat yet, but it's coming. Also the sour cream. Okay. But you want this kind of mixed up first. Once again, getting it spread out throughout the dough. Okay, next we're gonna get that half a cup of sour cream in there. And this. If this grosses you out using bacon fat, you don't have to use it. Like I said, you could add a little more sour cream, you could add a little more milk to add that additional moisture in here. You could use a different kind of oil if you'd like. If you want to use, since this is a savory scone, you could even use olive oil. You could use like any other kind of cooking oil. And we're just going to start mixing this around. And trying to get this well blended. And now we're going to add that milk that I was talking about. So what you're going to want to do, you know, some sour cream is thicker and some of it is more runny. So I never want to say add the milk right off, because if your sour cream is really runny and liquidy, you might not need it. Mine was pretty much on the thick side, so I definitely need it today. I'm gonna have to go get my tablespoon measure. Got it. Okay, so I'm just using regular old milk right now, and I'm going to put 1 tablespoon in there and see how that goes. Most recipes don't tell you this. Most recipes won't say, oh, add a little bit and then see if you need more. They'll just tell you right off the bat, you know, put 2 tablespoons or 3 tablespoons of milk. But I really like to give people that flexibility, because honestly, sometimes you don't need it. And if your dough comes out too wet, you're not going to love the result. So I'd rather have you kind of figure it out as you go. But I definitely need more. So I'm going to do one more scoop, or one more tablespoon, and see how that goes. And sometimes it's just a matter of how dry it is in your kitchen. You know, like if your heat is running a lot and it's super dry in the house, you're going to need more than you would on a day that it's maybe rainy but warm and you've got the windows open and it's more humid in your house. You're not going to need as much. But you want to keep adding until this actually looks like it's coming together into a dough. You don't, if it looks like you've got dry, crumbly bits that aren't sticking to the rest of it, that's not right. You don't want that. You want it to look like it's going to hold together. And make sure you get all the way down to the bottom, because a lot of times what you might do is you'll be stirring and stirring and the top part all looks good and you'll turn it all out because you think you're there and you think it's good enough, and get that stuff off the spoon too, because a lot of times the moisture will accumulate right in that little scoop and you want to get that into the rest of everything. Anyway, a lot of times you'll have the dry bits that aren't sticking to anything will fall down to the bottom, and when that happens it'll end up all fluffing off and you're not going to have that incorporated into your scone, and maybe your ratio will be off, or else if nothing else you've just wasted all those ingredients that could be, who knows, one extra scone. Okay, let's see where we're at. So it looks like I don't have dry bits. Let's see if this holds together. It's still a little fall aparty. I'm going to add one more tablespoon of milk, and I think this should do it for me. When you're doing it, it could be totally different. You might not need to add any. You might just need one or two. How many did I add here? 4 or 5, right? I think maybe 5. So that's actually surprising. I thought I might need 2 or 3. So it just goes to show you, you never know until you're doing it. So always be prepared to have a little bit extra. But you know, if you're running low on milk and you just don't have it, don't be afraid to do this recipe. I mean, you've got the sour cream in here already that's going to add the creaminess. You've got the cheese in here. You can just add water. It's going to help bring that dough together. It doesn't offer anything in the flavor department, but you've got so many other flavors going on in here. It'll still be okay. Okay, so now I am good. I can see it's holding together. I don't really have any dry bits. I'm just pressing it all in here. So if there is anything dry that hasn't gotten mixed in, it will pick it up now. And look at that. I mean, that's pretty good. I've got a couple little pieces that just fell off my fingers, but that's what I'm looking for. Now we're going to grab our sheet pan and our either parchment paper or silicone sheet, baking sheet, and we are just going to press this dough down into a flat disc. You don't want this to be too tall, because you want to make sure that it will bake all the way through and not be raw in the center. So I'm going to press this down to under an inch. I probably want it like an inch or less, maybe 3/4 of an inch. If you go too thin, you know, you're not making a pizza crust, so you don't want to do that. But it does have the baking powder in there, so it will still puff up. And just keep flattening. You could squeeze the sides in like this a little bit if they're starting to get jaggedy or crack. And just keep going round and around. Make sure that middle is the same height as the rest of it. You want this to be pretty flat. Okay, that's right about where I want it. And then you'll take a knife. If you're using a silicone sheet, you're going to want to be careful about not cutting through it with the knife, and just be very gentle with it. Or just go ahead and grab a different knife. Grab a butter knife or something that's not going to damage your silpat. Okay, but what you want to do is make sure you get all the way through and all the way down to the bottom. I recommend actually using a butter knife. I don't want to be responsible for anybody's injuries. And then what I'm doing is just cutting this into 8, hopefully pretty even pieces. So what I do is I cut it in half, then I cut each of those in half, then I cut each of those in half, and that should give you 8. You know, you might have pieces in here where there's a piece of bacon or something that's hard to cut through. It's okay. Then all we're going to do is get under those pieces, gently lift, and pull out. So what I do is go to every second one, because you don't want these touching while they're baking. You want each one of these to have a nice golden crust all the way around. And actually, you could probably just go in with your hand and pick it up. And these ones in the middle don't have to come out as far, but you don't want them to be touching, even at the tip. Okay, so now we've got these good-looking scones ready to go in the oven. I'm going to take a little bit of my milk that I have left and just gently spread it over the top. Now, milk is not going to give you as golden a color as like heavy cream would. Egg would give you the darkest color, then heavy cream, then maybe like half and half. You could also do this with butter. You could spread some melted butter over the top to give it a nice top crust. But since I have this milk here, that's what I'm using. Okay, now this is just going to go into the oven for about 20 to 25 minutes. I'm going to set my timer for 20 and then check it. If it doesn't look evenly gold and all around the top and sides, and also nice and golden on the bottom, I'm going to put it back in for another 5 minutes. Okay, I've just taken these out of the oven. They are piping hot. They were in there for 25 minutes. As you can see, this makes a substantial sized scone. So if you want this to go farther, if you want to share it with more people, if you just want to have smaller scones and put the rest in the freezer and save them for another day, you can easily do that. All you would do is when you are making that big flat disc and cutting it into 8 instead of making 1, you can make 2. And you could still cut them into 8, and that way they'll be about half the size of this, but still equally good. You won't leave it in the oven quite as long. You'll probably want to start at 15 to 20 minutes instead of 20 to 25. Mine, I checked after 20 minutes. They weren't quite where I wanted them to be yet, so I left them in another 5, and now they look perfect to me. They're nice and browned on the bottom. The top is ever so slightly golden. But remember, we just put some milk on there, so it wasn't going to turn really dark. And then when you break it open, it's a nice, soft, flaky inside, but it's definitely baked all the way through. So what's great about these savory scones is you are not limited by the ingredients that you could mix in here. Today we did green onions and cheddar and bacon, but you can do anything. If you just want to do like a 4-cheese blend, you can do that. If you have pizza lovers in your house and you want to do mozzarella and pepperoni and some of your other favorite pizza toppings, you can do that too. And actually that sounds pretty good to me. You could do like just a mixed herb, right? Just all kinds of different fresh herbs or even dry herbs. If you use dry though, be careful. They're much more potent, so you're not gonna want to use as many. Or like a herb and goat cheese is a beautiful combination that you could use on this. It would be fantastic. If you want these to be really breakfasty, you can do like breakfast sausage in there, and then maybe instead of some of the liquid, you add a little bit of maple syrup instead of the milk at the end. How good would that be? So those are just some other ways that you can use this recipe and be creative with it and make it something that you and your family are really gonna like. I hope you try them and I hope you like them. And stay tuned for the next scone demo, which is going to be about a sweet blueberry orange scone.